Welcome back. In today's video, we're diving into the top 5 chess traps for black that every player should know. These tricks will help you gain an upper hand and surprise your opponent. Trap number 5. The England Gambit is a tricky counter to queen's pawn opening, offering a 55% win rate. We play pawn to e5, and white's most common response is to accept with pawn captures on e5. Then, we continue with bishop to c5. White often plays knight to f3, and we respond with pawn to d6, encouraging white to trade off their doubled pawn. Now we play knight to a7, baiting white into capturing another gambit piece. Most players take it, falling into the trap. We then shock white with bishop captures on f2, deflecting the king from defending the queen. After the forced king move, we capture the queen, gaining a winning position with multiple attacking threats. Trap number 4, the Traxler counterattack, is a strong response to the king's pawn opening. White usually attacks the f7 pawn, aiming for the fried liver attack, but we counter aggressively. In the main line, after knight captures on f7, black achieves a 58% win rate. The correct move for white is actually bishop captures on f7, but even then, the position remains tricky. However, most opponents play knight captures on f7, thinking they are winning by forking multiple pieces. That's when we shock them with bishop captures on f2, delivering a powerful counterattack that disrupts white's position and gives black excellent winning chances. The best move for white is the counterintuitive king to f1, but the position remains complicated. However, in most cases, white will capture the bishop, as it feels natural. Now, we play knight captures on c4, another counterattacking move. No matter where the king moves, we follow up with queen to h4. This not only removes the queen from danger, but also creates a powerful threat. Queen to f2, delivering checkmate. With the f-file open, it becomes very difficult for white to defend. You can always activate your rook to continue the attack, and your knight from c6 is ready to jump forward, targeting key squares in white's position. This makes it easy for white to blunder. Right now, you threaten queen takes f2 for checkmate. If white plays pawn to g3, you can simply capture it or reposition with queen to f6, attacking from a different angle. After queen f2 check, followed by king to h3, a surprising move, pawn to d5, opens up a devastating check from the bishop. If white tries pawn to g4 to shield the king, you can play pawn to h5, breaking through. White is now defenseless. For example, after bishop takes d5, you can respond with pawn takes g4, delivering a fancy double check, a discovered check, and checkmate all at once. White could play differently, but this line shows how difficult it is to find the right moves. One mistake can lead to complete devastation. Number 3, a more solid counter to queen's pawn opening, pawn to d4. We still begin with a gambit, pawn to e5. After white captures, we play pawn to d6, entering the Charlie gambit. Previously, we saw bishop to c5, followed by pawn to d6, which relied on opponents falling into a trap. But here, pawn to d6 ensures better activity, faster development, and strong long-term play. This makes it a great choice, especially in blitz, as it's tough for white to handle. In most cases, white develops knight to f3 and knight to c3 in some order. The key idea in this variation is to castle queenside, so we must develop our queenside pieces first. That's the key difference. We don't follow standard moves like knight to f6 and immediately castling queenside. Instead, we prioritize developing queenside pieces first. In almost every case, we play knight to c6, bishop to g4, and queen to e7, methodically setting up for castling queenside. For example, after knight to c6, white develops a piece, and we follow up with bishop to g4. White will usually respond with pawn to e3 to protect the knight. Then we play queen to e7, and on the next move, we castle queenside. If you follow this plan correctly, your win rate can reach 60% or higher. The key advantage is having a strong position with open files and diagonals for your rooks and bishops, making it very difficult for white to handle. You keep up the pressure, and while a computer might defend, it's much harder for a human. Simply develop push pawn to h5, and white remains under constant attack. Many opponents castle kingside and blunder their queen immediately. You trade the knight, then play bishop takes h2, using a discovered attack to win the queen. Even if they avoid this, you still get a strong attacking position against their exposed king. Trap number 2. The most effective counter to the Italian game is the Russo gambit with pawn to f5. Most opponents will capture on f5, and after pawn to e4, you get a 61% win rate. What makes this opening strong is that all natural moves for white are wrong. They must find counterintuitive moves to survive. Their knight is under attack. with no good squares to retreat. In most cases, they panic and play blunders like bishop takes g8, putting them in even more trouble. Some opponents mistakenly think bishop takes g8 is good because it prevents you from castling. While that's true, the more important factor is that the bishop on c4 is one of white's few developed pieces. By trading it off, white loses most of their activity and their knight remains under attack, forcing it to retreat. Now, white is completely passive, and you have a perfect setup for the next phase of the game. White might try queen to h5 for a check, but even though you can easily stop it, I recommend letting them play it. This just leads them further in the wrong direction. You respond with pawn to d5, and if they play queen to h5, which they often will, that's another mistake on their part. White ignores development, hoping for an attack, and still under the false impression that you're making dubious moves they can punish. You play pawn to g6, and it turns out your rook on the g-file is quite useful, ready to support your attack. After an exchange, your rook is doing a great job. White will likely capture the pawn, hoping for some counterplay, but you respond with queen to g5, which not only protects your rook, but also threatens queen takes g2. From there, you'll attack their rook on h1, and white is essentially lost. For example, if they play pawn to g3, it doesn't change the outcome. It turns out that the queen, which has wasted so much time, is actually trapped. After rook to h6, the only move for the queen is to capture the pawn, but after bishop to d6, there's no escape. You win the queen and gain a significantly better position, making it completely winning for black. Trap number 1, the highest win rate opening for black, is another counter to the Italian game, especially against the fried liver attack. In this case, we play the bold knight takes e4 move, which shocks most opponents. Instead of defending the pawn, we sacrifice the knight. Which seems crazy, but it's actually a very tricky opening, with plenty of opportunities to win the game in the next few moves. I checked the database, and out of over 1 million games in this line, 98% of the time, white failed to find the correct response. While there's a small chance your opponent knows the right counter, the risk is minimal and worth taking. So, what's the plan? The two most common moves for white are either knight takes f7 or knight takes c4, both of which are wrong. Even if they play the correct bishop takes f7, they usually follow up with the wrong moves, leading to a bad position. In most cases, they'll go for knight takes f7, thinking the fork wins the game, but you respond with queen to h4, threatening f2, similar to the Traxler counterattack we discussed earlier. It's surprisingly difficult for white to defend this position, especially since you can easily bring your bishop into the attack and move your knight forward to control several squares in their territory. It's tough for white to handle these threats. For example, if white tries pawn to g3, thinking it shuts down black, you can sacrifice your knight with multiple threats. The a7 pawn is pinned to the rook, so white can't recapture with it. Plus, you threaten the bishop, and the knight on f7 is hanging. Queen to f4 is also coming. There are so many threats that white is lost. If white decides to grab your rook, thinking it's just an exchange, you play queen to f4, forcing them into check. The knight is controlling 2 key squares, so white can't defend. They'll have to play bishop to e2, losing the rook in the corner. To cover their king, they'll have to give up the bishop, but it's still hopeless. You take the bishop and push them into a checkmate,